Hello, in this video we will look at the content in Unit 1, Activity 3. And the content will be broken up into 3 parts, and as we've done at the beginning of every activity in Unit 1, we will start with parts of speech. And in this case, we will start with adjectives and adverbs in Part 1. And so we'll start with a definition of adjective. And so an adjective is a descriptive word that describes a noun or another adjective. And so you'll get plenty of examples and explanation here. In particular, focus right here. They'll explain the 4 different ways that an adjective can work. An adjective, as we said, is a descriptive word. Well, it can describe what kind, how many, how much, and which one. So that's what an adjective does. We'll see an example of adjectives in fiction, and so this will be a paragraph from the story Alice in Wonderland, and you'll see that the adjectives are in bold, and so we'll get some examples of how adjectives work in complete sentences and in a complete paragraph. And then we'll look at some more examples, and so you'll see examples of adjectives in sentences, and so if you roll over certain words here, you'll see that they're identified as adjectives. So again, we're looking at identifying adjectives. And then of course, you'll have to do the same on your own. You'll have to identify adjectives in sentences, and as we've done in previous activities, you'll be asked to underline the adjectives. So you're going to go through these 8 sentences and underline all the adjectives you can find. And as always, you can click here to check your answers. Once you're comfortable with adjectives, we'll move on to another descriptive word, and that's adverbs. And so adverbs describe verbs. So adjectives describe nouns, adverbs describe verbs. Adverbs can also, on occasion, describe adjectives or other adverbs. And so we'll, of course, start with some examples. You'll notice that a lot of adverbs end with the letters ly. But not always, but it is something that you can look for. If you notice words that end in ly, there's a chance that they're adverbs, because that's a common ending for adverbs. So just like with adjectives, we'll talk about how adverbs work, and adverbs can describe how, when, where, how much, and how often. So it's doing a very similar job to an adjective. It's just focused on the verb instead of the noun. And we'll see examples of adverbs in a sentence. And again, you can roll over certain words here, and they'll identify themselves as adverbs. So you can find examples of adverbs in sentences. And then you'll be asked to do the same again. You'll be asked to underline adverbs in 8 sentences and check your answers when you're done. If you'd like some more information on adjectives and adverbs, we've got some videos. So this is an introduction to adjectives and an introduction to adverbs by Khan Academy. So you can take a look, and they'll try to visualize things a little bit more for you. And another link that you can follow here is a little more information on the connection between verbs and adverbs. So if you'd like a little more detail on that, you can follow this link and explore further. Once you're comfortable with adverbs and adjectives, we can move on to Part 2, and this is going to be our final section on parts of speech, and we're going to be looking at conjunctions and prepositions. And so adverbs and adjectives were 2 types of descriptive words, so they nicely go together in one sort of lesson. Well, conjunctions and prepositions are both joining words, so they kind of naturally go together in one lesson as well too. So a conjunction is a word that connects other words, phrases, or sentences. So common conjunctions would be and, but, or, because. There are 2 particular types of conjunctions that you want to pay attention to, and one of them is coordinate conjunctions. And they're probably better known by an acronym called fanboys. Some of you might have heard that term before. Fanboys, we can break that up into for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So those are the fanboys, and when you're using those words, you're usually using them in the middle of a sentence or between two words or two phrases to join them together. And that's one type of conjunction. And so they give you examples here of how those words can join together: adjectives, nouns, verbs, adverbs, or phrases. Another type of conjunction goes beyond holding together individual words and phrases, and it holds together complete clauses. And that's something called a subordinate conjunction. And so a subordinate conjunction will hold together what we call a subordinate clause and an independent clause. So if we look at this sentence here, after I finished my homework, that's a subordinate clause. That clause cannot stand alone as its own sentence. After I finished my homework, what? That word after makes it so that it's incomplete. And then we have a second clause, I watched television. So I watched television is an independent clause. So the word after is joining together a subordinate clause and an independent clause. It's linking them. It's allowing them to be in the same sentence and to make sense together. So after is a subordinate clause, again acting as a joining word, in this case joining together two clauses. And then here's some examples of subordinate clauses that you can see in writing. There's a lot of them, and you can use them in a lot of different ways, and we'll see some examples as we go here. So that's conjunctions, two types of conjunctions. Now we're going to look at prepositions, and prepositions is another linking or joining word. And common prepositions would be at, by, into, from, with. And so if we look, it says a preposition is a word that introduces a noun and provides more information about something. For example, in the sentence, Mary goes to church on Sunday. The to is a preposition that introduces the noun church, which tells us where Mary goes, and on is a preposition that introduces the noun Sunday, which tells us when Mary goes. So you have small words, in this case to and on, which are introducing nouns into sentences and answering questions such as where and when. So below is a list of common prepositions. Notice that some of the words appear in more than one column. So you'll notice that, for example, at can be used to establish time, and at can be used to introduce an action or movement. So you'll see a number of words overlap in the different columns. Now, we're going to do something a little different with conjunctions and prepositions. Instead of doing a practice exercise where you underline individual words, what I'm going to have you do is click on this interactive activity, and when you open it, it looks like this. And if you go through this activity, they'll go over prepositions and conjunctions here. They'll explain them a little bit. They'll provide you with an explanation, for example, here of the two types of conjunctions again. And then what they're going to ask you to do is to go through a whole paragraph here and identify all the prepositions and then all of the conjunctions. So you're going to see if you can find them, and they're going to tell you if you got them all or if you're missing some. So it's just a different way for us to do a practice exercise. Instead of doing it on our website right here, we're going to try to do it as an interactive activity here. Well, once you've gone through that activity, what you can do is you can take a look at more videos if you'd like. And so we've got 3 more Khan Academy videos here, 2 on conjunctions and 1 on prepositions. And that's it for parts of speech. We've covered 7 parts of speech at this point, and that's all we're going to cover in Unit 1. So now we move on to part 3. I'm going to have to change that. Part 3, listening skills. And this is what's going to lead to your assignment in this activity. So you want to pay particular attention to listening skills here. And what we're going to focus on is tips for being a good listener. So they're going to give you 4 tips here on how you can improve your listening and things that you can think about when you're listening to someone to make sure that you're being an active participant in the conversation and paying attention. So pay attention to those 4 tips. Okay? And then secondly, we're going to look at verbal cues. And so verbal cues are things that you can listen for in what the other person's saying to have a better understanding of what they're saying. And those verbal cues are listed for you in this chart: tone, vocabulary, intonation, background sounds, and speaker's perspective. So if you can pay attention to someone speaking and identify the tone they're using, which would mean the attitude they're using. So are they speaking in a positive or negative attitude? Are they speaking in a relaxed or a nervous manner? Are they speaking in a friendly or hostile way? So what is the attitude in which they're speaking? That can tell you a lot about what they're trying to say if you can identify the tone. The vocabulary. Can you identify different terms that they're using? Sometimes, depending on the topic that someone is talking about, they might use very specific terminology related to that field that you'd have to pay attention to and understand. Sometimes, when a speaker is speaking, they might use slang or a particular dialect from where they're from. And so you have to pay attention to that and make sure that you understand certain slang terms or certain terms that they're using that you might not be familiar with. So it's important to pay attention to the vocabulary that the speaker is using. Intonation is the variations and changes in the person's voice. So when they're speaking, when does their voice go up and when does it go down? When do they choose to pause? There's reasons that they're doing that. If they're pausing or if they're raising their voice, they're probably trying to get you to pay attention to something specific. Background sounds. Usually when we're listening to someone speak, there's often noise in the background or something going on in the background, and that can play into to what's being said and add context and detail to what you're listening to. So you want to pay attention to background sounds. And then speaker's perspective. You want to try to determine what is the perspective of the speaker. What is the person who's speaking's opinion? So whatever it is they're talking about, you want to try to not just take it as factual information and just have it go in one ear and out the other. You want to think about it. You want to pay attention to what they're saying and try to determine what do they think about what they're saying and do I agree with that? So the more attention you give to the perspective or the opinion of the speaker, the more you're going to get out of what they're saying, and the more likely it is that you will look deeper at what they're saying and bring your own opinions to what they're saying as well too. There's some practice here for listening skills. So there's a video here called How Our Plastic is Harming the Environment. It's a CBC News video, and so I'll ask you to watch this. And then after you watch the video, the tone, vocabulary, intonation, background sounds, and speaker's perspective in that video has been broken down here. So we've taken all of those verbal cues and we've applied them to this video. It's very important that you pay attention to this video and understand how we determined the tone, the vocabulary, the intonation, the background sounds, and the speaker's perspective in that video, because you're going to have to do something very similar in your assignment in this activity. You're going to have to take another news video and apply these verbal cues on your own. So consider this practice for what you're going to do in the assignment. Lastly, there's one more bit of practice here. There's a little write-up of a CBC News radio piece, and you'll see that in the different parts of the write-up, they've given you examples of how you could add in verbal cues. So if you were the radio announcer, in this case Bob Bellows, what could you do when you first announce, "Hello, I'm Bob Bellows with CBC News Radio"? Well, if we scroll over here, it says you could pause after the introduction to catch the attention of the listeners. What could you do when you mention air conditioning in cars and homes? Well, you could include background sounds of sprinklers and air conditioners to emphasize what you're saying. So the idea here is to just see the different verbal cues that you could add to a news broadcast. And that's it. That's our content page. You can move on to the assignment.